I handed out a couple of papers last week in preparation for our time today. We're in Hebrews 7. We've gotten to this difficult teaching part, which the author was preparing them for about Melchizedek. We're looking in this big section at the supremacy of the Messiah, that Jesus Christ really is better. He's better as the high priest, and we start to look at Melchizedek. We said, who is he? His name actually means, my king is righteous. He's the king of Salem. Salem is Jerusalem. It's also the word shalom, or he's the king of peace. And he explains that in chapter 7, verse 2. He's the priest of God Most High, we learn from Genesis 14. And he blesses Abraham, and in response, Abraham gives him a tithe. Then we talked about a comparison of Melchizedek and Jesus. That I wanted to stress this point, that a shadow is cast from reality. The reason people fear shadows is because they know something is generating the shadow. And if something's generating, what is that something? And Melchizedek comes onto the scene in Genesis to prefigure Jesus Christ who's coming on the scene. And so he's a shadow of the real one. So we don't get all of his details. He's without father or mother or genealogy, but that's all right. We don't need all of those details. But ultimately, he has no requirement to meet the bloodline like a Levite. He has neither beginning of days nor end of days, but we don't need to know all about Melchizedek because we're looking at Jesus. And he resembles the Son of God in that he continues a priest forever. He's a shadow looking ahead to Jesus Christ. Then we talked a little bit about Melchizedek. Is he a real person? So what did we say? You remember? Is Melchizedek a real person? Or is he a theophany, the pre-incarnate Christ? Or is he an angel? He's real. And why do we say he was real? Bible calls him a man. Good. What else?
Saying that he doesn't have a beginning, ending, and time and all that doesn't mean he's without it. It just means we're not mentioning it.
Right. Good. Okay, what else?
Was it king of a place?
He was a king of a place, all right? For him to be a king of a place, most kings don't just show up on the scene, become king, and then they're gone for a moment. They rule. There's a length of time. There's a basis. What else? All right, we talked about that Zedek seems like it's a kingly name because in Joshua 10:1 you get another king of Salem, Adonizedek, which his name means my Lord is righteous. However, we would never hold that Adonizedek was a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus Christ. And my Lord fits really well with theology, but that's not it. It said Melchizedek is like or resembles the Son of God, not that he is. As king of Salem, he would have ruled. We said that his humanity, Jesus' humanity, comes at the incarnation. We have a really tough time explaining if Jesus is human and ruling someplace for a while, and then he removes his humanity only to come back as a baby and to take on flesh. That would seem strange. And then in Psalm 110:4, God appoints Messiah as a priest after the order of Melchizedek. Therefore, that would be two people. You wouldn't say, Jesus, you're a priest after yourself. That wouldn't make sense. And so we talked about in what ways was Jesus like Melchizedek. Just going through a quick recap. He's like Jesus because Melchizedek was both a king and a priest. And Israel's king was separate. Hopefully you had a chance to go back and read over those two passages where Saul decided he would act as priest and Isaiah decided he would do that. And I will tell you, there are two occasions where David and Solomon offer sacrifices, but God's okay with those. And the reason is that they recognize that the priest rules and the priest is God's man. And God is going to speak directly to the priest and God is going to speak to the king. And yet, they put the priest in his proper position. But Jesus, our Messiah, is both king and high priest. And what's his position in heaven? He's seated. We said, what tribe does Jesus come from? Judah. And we'll read later about his work as high priest. Okay? So that's just that quick intro. Let's go ahead and read 7:1-3. That'll capture that, and then we'll move ahead to Hebrews 7:4-10. And we'll open up and discuss, and I'll ask you questions on that.
Some people think that Melchizedek may have been one of the sons, because of the age and the respect that Abraham gave him, it could even have been one of the sons of Noah for a length of days, and I think,
You mean generated from Noah's line?
yeah, directly from Noah's line, even his oldest son.
Okay.
Because if you think about Abraham's age and Noah's, the longevity of those lives, he could have been 80, 90 years old and still been, Melchizedek may have been Japheth, I think they said. When you look at history and the different things of history, and the way he reverenced him as Lord, showing him that he was an older, Abraham went young at this time, and he reverenced him as Lord, as a leadership, not just as king, but as Lord.
Yeah.
And so it shows that Melchizedek was an older, very godly man that loved God. So it was either of the straight line, maybe a son of Japheth, or Japheth himself.
Yeah. Now we hear about, remember Salem is part of Canaan. And David and I were talking after class last week, and you remember, Abraham comes through the land, and does God give him the land right away? No, it's years later. It's over 400 years later. Why? Because God says the sin of the Canaanites hadn't reached their full yet. And so there is coming a point where God's going to destroy. So I've not heard that before. I'm always careful with extra biblical material because the scripture kind of gives us what we have to work with. And sometimes it's not that it's hiding anything. It's just saying that here are your important details of where we are. But we do know, and the description's going to come along here as time goes on, that Abram's going to bless this guy Melchizedek. And that's going to be part of the argument here. So
It's more in the line of the history of the Jews, not in the Bible.
Right.
A Jewish man came and taught one of our classes, and he was talking about the history of the Jews. And he said Melchizedek is in the line, and could have been, according to their history, they're pretty sure he was in one of Noah's sons. And that's why everybody came to them for their sacrifices, and everybody, because that was the generational line right there
Okay.
that they came to. And it's not out of this,
Sure.
but it's out of the historical documents of the Jewish people.
Yeah.
It made a great discussion for a year or two at college.
I can imagine. So if you would help me out, let's start at chapter 7, verse 1, and let's get down to verse 10 to start.
Without any dispute, the lesser is blessed by the greater. In this case, mortal men receive tithes, but in this case, one received them. And who is,
You're at verse 1
I'm sorry.
of chapter 7. Yeah.
No, we jumped way down. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham as he was returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom also Abraham appointed the 10th part of all the spoils, was first of all by the translation of his name, King of Righteousness, and then also King of Salem, which is King of Peace.
Verse 3.
Without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, remains a priest continually.
Consider then how great this Melchizedek was. Even Abraham, the great patriarch of Israel, recognized this by giving him a tenth of what he had taken in battle. Now the law of Moses required that the priests, who are descendants of Levi, must collect a tithe from the rest of the people of Israel, who are also descendants of Abraham. But Melchizedek, who was not a descendant of Levi, collected a tenth from Abraham. And Melchizedek placed a blessing upon Abraham, the one who had already received the promises of God. And without question, the person who has the power to give a blessing is greater than the one who is blessed.
And in this case, mortal man receives tithes, but in that case, one receives them, of whom it is witness that he lives on. And so to speak, through Abraham, even Levi, who received tithes, paid tithes, for he was still in the loins of his father when Melchizedek met him.
All right, so let's look at this. There's this difference between the Levitical priesthood and the priesthood of Melchizedek. What do you see that's different? How do you compare and contrast?
The Levitical priesthood had to have prove their ancestry in order to hold the position.
Good. And Melchizedek? Correct. All right.
Apparently it didn't really matter.
Right. He was selected because God appointed him. Okay, good. What else?
That was also one of the definitive statements that if he was son of Japheth, if he was Japheth himself, he would have been the son of, then he would have a line to go back to. If he was Japheth himself, after his mom and dad died, there was no genealogy line to go back to.
Okay.
The whole world was wiped out. So therefore, he was a priest chosen by God because he was chosen to be one of the only ones that survived Earth's destruction.
Okay.
So that was one of the arguments for and pro against it.
So what's another difference though between the Levitical priesthood and the priesthood of Melchizedek here?
Levites were required to take
Good. They were required to take a tenth. But Melchizedek? Go ahead, finish that, Mike. Yeah.
he wasn't required to.
He wasn't required, but he actually received it. Okay, good. What else?
They were priests, they were not kings.
Okay, they were priests, not kings. Good. We got that first one there knocked out. Look at verse 5. What was the tithe based on? Okay, what about Melchizedek? I just gave it to him. You know, there was this whole promise aspect for Abraham that Abraham knew that he had solid promises from God. Therefore, he could give. See, Abraham didn't hold back thinking that I've got to hold on to this wealth. God's already told me I'm going to have a great name. He's going to bless me. So he could freely give. There's a good lesson in this because we don't give because we're commanded to. I give because I know God's going to care for me. What else?
The people who receive tithes still tithe.
Good. The people who received tithes were still tithing. The Levites were doing that. By the way, quick summary of the Levites. Levi is one of the tribes of Israel. You don't see them in the 12-tribe list when you see land because they got no land allotment. Their service was going to be for God. And are all Levites priests? Okay, they're the priestly tribe, but it's Aaron's line that is actually going to serve in the tabernacle and in the temple. Okay? The other Levites are going to do things. They're either going to carry the tent or they're going to carry the furniture, but it's Aaron's line within Levi that he's actually going to be the one that's over and his children doing things. In verse 7, we have a comparison made. It's a major comparison, and this is what he's getting to. What does he say between the difference between the Levitical priesthood and the priesthood of Melchizedek? Yeah. There's this whole conversation of inferior and superior that he's saying, hey, we raise up the Levitical priesthood pretty high. Remember, he's writing to Jewish Christians. But this priesthood was better. Why do you know that? Abraham, the great patriarch, gave a tithe to this guy long before the law had even called for Levites to step up. So there's something being made here. Verse 8, what's the distinction that he gives? What's the difference between these two groups?
It says mortal men receive tithes, but he receives them,
Keep reading.
of whom it is witnessed that he lives.
Yeah, they're mortal men. But there's an ongoing priesthood because he lives. You see, we're never told about Melchizedek's death. Does that mean he's still around and alive? No. God's using him as a shadow to prepare us for the reality of Jesus, who Jesus died, but he rose from the grave, and he lives forever. He's our high priest forever. Remember, his argument is Jesus is better. So he's stopping and he says, let me tell you about the Levites versus Melchizedek, so that he'll bring in Jesus. And then verse 9, what's the argument he makes in verse 9? And by the way, you'll hear me say argument all the time. We tend to think argument is like I'm fussing at you. And an argument is simply I make a premise, and then I'm going to support that with different points. So that's what I mean when you hear me say that.
Just a quick question. So Melchizedek, he blessed Abraham, but the Levites, they never conferred a blessing on the people. Is that correct?
You got it. All right. They received the tithes, but God was the one that blessed. That's why this is unique when it says that he blessed, but they didn't. Okay? Good. What else? Look at verse 9.
The Levites had to give their own tithes.
Mm-hmm.
Melchizedek, of course, did not.
Yeah, he's going to say that the Levites came after Abraham. But Melchizedek was before Levi, which was before Jacob, which was before Isaac. And he says the fact that Levi was in Abraham's loins, it was like Levi was tithing to Melchizedek. Okay? Now, if you're a Jewish person, and you're back in this time, hey, that's a huge statement. You're telling me Levites tithe to this other priest? Well, what's going on here? So he begins to move, and we're going to move 11 to 25. And he's going to start to make this argument here about Jesus being better. Verse 11, now if perfection had been attainable through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need would there have been for another priest to arise after the order of Melchizedek, rather than the one named after the order of Aaron? If the Levitical priesthood is so good, then we shouldn't need a second one. 12, for when there is a change in the priesthood, there is necessarily a change in the law as well. For the one of whom these things are spoken belonged to another tribe, for which no one has ever served at the altar. For it is evident that our Lord was descended from where? Judah. And in connection with that tribe, Moses said nothing about the priest. Verse 15. This becomes even more evident when another priest arises in the likeness of Melchizedek, who has become a priest not on the basis of a legal requirement concerning bodily descent. Remember, legality. The lawyers of the times, what are they focused on? Torah, Mosaic law. That's the legal requirement. It's not that this one had to come about by legal requirement concerning his bodily descent, but by the power of an indestructible life. Verse 17, for it is witnessed of him from Psalm 110:4, you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Verse 18, for on the one hand, a former commandment is set aside because of its weakness and uselessness. And you go, what do you mean? So he explains it in a parenthesis. Verse 19, for the law made nothing perfect. When you read the Ten Commandments, does that make you get perfect and better? What does law do to people?
Yes.
It condemns them. And what tends to happen if you keep increasing law? Does it make people better? Do people shudder in fear and get better? What tends to happen? You do more wrong. You rebel. You figure out a way about the law. That's why you can't legislate sin. Okay? We could come up with all the laws that we'd like, and we should to be protective. But if you're going to institute them, you've got to institute them. But they're not going to end sinful activity. So he says, verse 19, the law made nothing perfect. But on the other hand, a better hope is introduced, through which we draw near to God. Now, if you were here, you'll remember, I keep saying this, that we've got a section that started at 4:16. Let us then with confidence draw near to God. I want you to look for every draw near, because it's going to be in chapter 7, it's going to be in chapter 9, and chapter 10. And he's going to hammer this point over and over again. It is, on the other hand, we have a better hope is introduced, through which we draw near to God. And it was not without an oath. Verse 20. For those who formerly became priests were made such without an oath. How did you become a priest if you were a Levite? Say it again?
You were of Aaron's line.
Yeah, you were born.
Yeah.
Look, it's a baby. He's going to be a priest. Buddy, you grew up. This is our family. This is your job. God didn't come down and say, you, Josiah, you shall be a priest. No, he had already set that up. So he says, it was not without an oath. 20. For those who formerly became priests were made such without an oath. But this one was made a priest with an oath by the one who said to him, again, Psalm 110:4, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever. This makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant. Now, earlier in the book of Hebrews, we said, what were the requirements for you to be a priest? No? To be a priest, what did you have to be? You had to be man, and you had to be, we said a second thing. You had to be appointed by God. Now, God had appointed Aaron's line. But in this case, Jesus is a priest. Remember, we started this whole section. You have a great high priest, this Jesus, because he's man and he's been appointed by God who said, you are a priest forever. Why is Jesus a king? Because he's born out of the line of Judah, and he's going to be a king. Why is he a priest? Because God appointed him to be a priest. Okay? Verse 23. The former priests were many in number because they were prevented by death from continuing in office, but he holds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever. We're not talking about Melchizedek now, we're talking about Jesus. Consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who do what? Draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for him. So I gave you a couple discussion questions just to ask you. What is Jesus Christ doing in heaven now? According to Romans 8:34 in here. And what dimension does this give to our Christian assurance? What's Jesus doing now for us? Say it again?
Sitting.
He's sitting. Good. What is he doing while he's sitting, though?
He's making intercession for us.
He's making intercession for us, all right? Jesus is there with the Father, and he is interceding on our behalf. What dimension does this give to our Christian assurance? Remember, there's a lot of conversation with regard to Hebrews, and especially Hebrews 6:4-6. Can you lose your salvation? If Jesus is a better priest than the Levitical order, because Melchizedek is better than the Levitical order, and he's just a shadow of Jesus, therefore he's better than all of this, what does this mean for your and my assurance in Jesus Christ and our salvation? It's guaranteed. Okay? He's the one interceding for us. He didn't leave it just up onto me that now I get saved and now I've got to hold on to this faith and make sure that it's going to be good and rock solid. How do you think you and I should respond to these truths about Jesus' unique role as a high priest?
You should go to him with everything.
Yeah.
He's got it all.
Yeah. Am I nervous? Am I worried in my relationship with him? No, because he's the perfect high priest. Let's get this comparison. What's the difference between the Levitical priest? This is what I gave you to do. What's the difference that you saw between the Levitical priest and the priesthood of Jesus? What's different? Let me split you up, because y'all talk when you're in groups. I'm really not trying to trick you, I promise you. I'm not hiding a bag of answers over here and you got to find them. All the answers should hopefully be in the text, and you all see things that I don't see. Tim brought something out last week, and that's good. But yeah, y'all join up in a group over here, join up in a group over here, back there, and let's discuss for a little bit. What are the differences between the Levitical priesthood? Because we just read from 11 to 25, and there's some stark differences between the Levites and Jesus. Janice? She's calling you.
Pretty Mama, how are you? Good. Okay, well, Levi's died. I mean, they're making some Okay. It's focused.
It's the same chart, but he was doing he was doing the comparison of Melchizedek. Now it's Jesus, the lead part of the year. It's gotta be very serious.
That's right. The Levitical priesthood was
Hey, man, how you doing? Yeah, absolutely. I see it, man. Okay.
Medical priest, can achieve perfection.
All right, see, I love it. Put you together and everybody gets to talking. That's good. What are you finding? What are you seeing? What's the differences?
Well, Levites are man, they die.
Yeah, they're mortal. They die.
Jesus is eternal.
Yeah? What else?
Levites are Levites, not Judites.
Levites are Levites. It's not Judites. Good. What else?
Jesus is perfect and Levites are not.
Jesus is perfect. Levites aren't. Good. He's sinless. They sin. We got pretty good record of some of the Levites that sin. To make sure that we recognize that throughout the Bible. What else?
Jesus blessed them directly, but they called the Levites speak to God on their behalf.
All right, Jesus blesses directly, but the Levites are the intermediary and speak to God on their behalf for them too. Old law versus new law. Good. This is the first time we ever hear of a new covenant in the book of Hebrews. And he's going to hit covenant hard. He's actually going to say covenant 17 times in Hebrews from this point on. Covenant only shows up 16 times in all of the New Testament. So this is pretty strong as he's making this entry point. Good.
The Levites could only go to God once a year. Jesus opened the door for us to go to him all the time.
Good. And how often did Jesus go? He went once. So we're going to hold on to once in a bit. He's there all the time, but he does his priestly work one time, and it's sufficient. So you see, the Levitical priesthood is insufficient. Go ahead, Michael.
One of the things you mentioned was that the Levites had to constantly sacrifice something, and the priesthood of Jesus is a self-sacrifice.
Yeah, good. Good, good. No Levite ever sacrificed themselves. That would be bad. And insufficient. And wrong. All right? So there were multiple men because they kept dying. That's not really good when your priest keeps dying. But he has to because he's mortal. But Jesus, he's one man. It's sufficient. We got Levi and Judah. These are some that I saw. There are legal requirements for the Levitical priesthood. But again, Jesus is appointed by God. Psalm 110. Mortal men, they die, but Jesus has this indestructible life. And then the Levitical priesthood is based on the law, but the priesthood of Jesus is based on a better hope. So while you're in discussion group, here's some more questions. Why is the teaching on Christ as the better high priest so important for believers of all times? Remember, Scripture's got to work in 100 AD and 600 AD. It's got to work in 2016 in Haiti after you've just been destroyed by a hurricane, just as well as it's got to work in Syria, as well as it's got to work in the U.S. That's a problem with prosperity preaching. If you can't apply it at all times to all people, something's off. So, why is the teaching on Christ as the better high priest so important for believers of all times? going to give you a bunch here to talk about. What assurance of hope is given in Hebrews 7:23 to 25? And then what best motivates you in your life as a believer, fear or hope? And how does this relate to your understanding? I'm going to pull this one away and just do the first two to start. Okay? So why is the teaching on Christ as the better high priest so important? What assurance of hope is given in Hebrews 7:23 and 25? By the way, I'll tell you this. How many of you were in church last week and heard Danny Aiken speak from Southeastern Baptist Seminary? His point, his argument was this, is that for too many cases, Christians have a very weak theology. And you move to wherever you are. Okay? And I spoke with Nikki and the kids afterwards, and I will tell you, that's my argument and hope, is I realize something like this is kind of thick. And you're going, well, this is kind of thick. Why? Because if we get to the point that we wonder, is Jesus better? This has been an argument for over 2,000 years. That, come on, man, Jesus isn't better than this. And I'm talking about something that has been established for over 2,000 years when we look at the Mosaic Law. Mosaic Law is good, but Jesus is better. And as we thicken up in theology and we go, man, the Word of God has something for you and I, and it matters, and we link on to that, and all of a sudden, all that stuff in the world that surrounds us, that comes, and it'll shift us and move us, if you hold on to Jesus, I promise you, it'll take you through some tough times. That's personal testimony. And some of you have gone through things that you know it was only because of that. But you've also had those moments where it's like, yeah, but I'm not sure. And he's trying to make a rock-solid argument. Jesus is better. Jesus is better. So that's why we camp out here. So go ahead and discuss, why is it so important for you and I, believers of all times? Why would you even be able to share with somebody whose house has just been destroyed or their life has been wrecked? And what assurance of hope is given in Hebrews 7:23 to 25? Discuss.
What did you say?
That's all. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, put a basket in there. Hey, by the way, if you end up having to leave, Nikki reminded me, she'll put a basket at the back. If you could just drop some cash again for our class supporting breakfast this morning. We need to raise $64 serving those that come and visit on the bus ministry. So. Then I'm going to throw up there as well for you to transition and really just to think about this. What best motivates you? Ask that. What best motivates me in my life as a believer? Is it fear or hope? And how does this relate to your understanding of Hebrews? Remember, as you relate to God, do you relate to God out of fear or do you relate to God out of hope? Because those two are going to change how you read everything and how you process everything.
Fear will motivate you short term, but hope will motivate you long term.
Okay. Thank you all for playing, by the way, our orchestra crew. Let me leave you thinking about this, and we'll come back to that next week. He finishes up this way in the chapter, 26 to 28. God bless. For it was indeed fitting that we should have such a high priest. Let me tell you about Jesus' qualifications. Holy, innocent, unstained, separated from sinners, exalted above the heavens. He has no need, like those high priests, to offer sacrifices daily, first for his own sins and then for those of the people, since he did this once. I want you to circle once. We're going to see once 7 times. Okay? It's going to show up 2 different ways. This is one phrase. Once for all, we'll see 3 times. And then other times we'll see once. We saw once before. Anybody remember where we saw once? No, in Hebrews. Hebrews 6, 4-6 was that tough section that we wonder about. Can someone lose their salvation? And it was very subtle. If you look at verse 4, it is impossible in the case of those who have once been enlightened. It's a one-time occurrence you get saved. It's not over and over again. So he's building something and it's subtle. And then it's going to start to come through. He did this once for all when he offered up himself. Verse 28. For the law appoints men in their weakness as high priests, but the word of the oath, which came later than the law, appoints the Son who has been made perfect forever. We heard about oath twice, that when God gave Abraham the oath, and he could swear by none greater, he swore by himself. So that in these things it's impossible for God to lie. We would know that Abraham's promises were good. We've seen them fulfilled. Now he says, Jesus, by oath, you are a high priest forever, after the order of Melchizedek. I can believe that Jesus is my high priest interceding for me because God himself made the oath. So you see this once and once for all. It'll be a key term. And then I'll send this to you. I want you to look at this. What did Jesus do once for all in 7:27? We just read that one. So what was that one? What did he do once for all? He offered up himself once for all. What does Jesus do once for all in 9:12 and 10:10? And then we find once, first in Hebrews 6:4, but we're going to see it all the way through here. Again, key words. Once. 13 times. Better. Over and over again, he's building something so that we look and we go, yeah, this is good stuff that we've got to hold on to. So go through all of the notes. We'll send those out. Next, we're going to look at the superiority of the new covenant, the superiority of Messiah's priestly service. We'll get to the superiority of Messiah's sacrifice. And then we're going to run in, we haven't seen one for a while, to warning number 4, the danger of despising. Remember, these warnings keep coming, but it's not just warnings without teaching. There's teaching that wraps all around it. And there's teaching that we want to hold on to that'll keep us and guide us. Okay? Questions, comments, thoughts? Again, I realize some of this is thick, all right? But I appreciate you all greatly. Feel free and you can email me if you're like, hey man, move through this stuff a little quicker. Or we got that already. You don't have to say that one again. That's all right. Let me know. Or, hey, can you go back over this? I didn't catch that. And that's okay. That's never a problem as we walk on this together. Okay? Good. Mark, can you close us out in prayer, please?
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for a chance for us to come together as a body of believers and worship and learn and study your word, Father, and grow closer to you, learn more about you, Father God. We ask you to speak with us to serve us now as we go to worship or go to serve. Watch over, protect us, and keep us all safe, Father God. We love you and we praise you. Amen.
Amen. Amen.